In this introduction to bag making course, I'm going to take you through all of the tools and equipment that I use to make my own luxury bags from home. I'm also going to take you through a full step-by-step tutorial of one of my hand-stitched bags, just to give you a little taste of my teaching style. Now, to make sure this video doesn't go for too long, it is going to be a slightly cut down version of the full tutorial. You'll find the full tutorial within my online course, along with a bunch of different bag making styles, including hand stitch techniques, machine stitch techniques, tips and tricks, and techniques that you can mix and match to make bag designs of your own. But the whole purpose of this course today is to give you a taste of what I Can Make Bags is all about, and to give you an idea of whether luxury bag making is a craft that you feel ready to tackle. So before we start, a little bit about me. My name is Amanda and I am the founder of I Can Make Bags and the founder of I Can Make Shoes, which is the sister business to I Can Make Bags. Now, my teaching style with both I Can Make Shoes and I Can Make Bags is very similar. It's all totally beginner friendly, and I teach you step by step how to make really good quality products from home without any heavy duty machinery. I've been teaching this since 2010 and have students from all over the world, so I feel really confident that you're going to absolutely love my technique and make your own beautiful bags. You also have access to a community of like-minded individuals who are also sharing their journeys and tips and tricks and suppliers and troubleshooting and all that kind of stuff. So it really does just get more and more valuable as you take part and get to know the rest of the community. And I have to say, you guys said it, not me, this course is really good. But that's enough about me. Let's dive into the next part, where I'm going to talk you through some of the tools and equipment that you need to make your own bags from home. Now, whenever I'm starting a new home craft project, I like it to take up as little space as possible. So as you can see here, this is really as much space as bag making is going to take up to start with. Of course, you'll sort of get more things as you go, but let's go through what I've got here so that you sort of understand the essentials. First thing I've got here is a little stitching pony. Now, you don't need these to get started, but they can really help when doing hand-stitched projects. Essentially, it's a clamp that goes onto the edge of your table and holds your pieces steady while you hand stitch them with 2 needles. All right, inside our bag making toolkit, we've got a few more goodies. We've got water-based glue. Safety beveler and spare blades is for skiving down the leather to really reduce the bulk. A heavy roller is really essential for flattening out any seams and also for flattening out any hand stitches as well. Dividers are really used for 2 things. One of them is pattern making, and the other one is for marking out where we want our stitch holes to go. Now, all of the patterns within my online course are already pre-done, so they are just print and go patterns, but I do have a tutorial in there as well if you wanted to self-draft your own patterns, and this would come in really handy if that was something you wanted to do. We've got a few extras in here, like little stitch thread cutting scissors, needles, a thimble. We've got an awl, which is going to come in really handy for punching through those holes, a silver pen, and a glue spatula. So just a few little bits in that one. And we've also got a black and a white thread in there to get started. But you might notice behind me, I've got loads of colors of threads there. So yeah, as you build up your collection, you might want to get extra colors as well. Okay, so now onto the good stuff. This is a punching block, and these are what are called pricking irons. Now, pricking irons get lined up on your pattern, and they actually punch the holes right through your leather, making the holes for us to stitch through. You'll also need a mallet for punching those tools through your leather. You'll also need a really sharp knife for cutting your pieces out, and a little piece of sandpaper just for smoothing out the edges and for getting really nice flat surface to do your edge painting on. I guess the edge paints are a nice to have rather than an essential, but if you do want to make a really, really good quality product with that beautiful sealed in sort of almost rubbery edge to it, you're going to want to get yourself a beautiful color set. I really love the Giardini paints because I just find them really easy to apply and you just get a really nice clean finish with not much effort. So that's why I go with these ones, but I do talk about a few other paint options within my main course if you wanted to see what else is out there. Last but not least, tapes come in really handy when making bags from home. I use double-sided tape for sticking my patterns down to my leather before I actually go ahead and cut them out. And I also use double-sided tape sometimes for attaching pieces of material together or leather before either hand stitching them or whizzing them through the sewing machine. Reinforcement tape comes in really handy when we want to reduce stretch or just reinforce a certain area. So sometimes I'll put this inside a long crossbody strap or a handle, and sometimes I'll put it behind some area that I'm stitching, like maybe handles, just to give it a lot of extra strength. Now, when it comes to leather, there are a lot of options, but I really like to stick with something that's got a medium temper, so not too soft, not too stiff. And thickness-wise, I usually say somewhere between 0.8 and 1.2. I find 1 millimeter a great middle ground for most bags. The hardware is where you can get really creative because there are just so many different options available out there for buckles and press studs and fastenings, so you can really express your creativity when it comes to the hardware as well. I'm now going to take you through a full step-by-step tutorial on how to make this super cute little leather box bag. It is such a quick and easy make, but really quite an impressive finished product. I'm going to link the pattern down below so that you can download that before we start, and let's dive straight in. Now, when it comes to leather selection for this bag, I have opted to go with this beautiful fuchsia cowhide. It's really not so much about the thickness as it is with the stiffness for this type of bag. So what we're looking for here is a medium to stiff temper. So I just wanted to show you this one that I've selected so that you can sort of get a feel for how it behaves. So you can see as I'm kind of bending it that it does have some movement, but it is somewhat a stiffer leather. In terms of thickness, this one is about 1.2. Anywhere between 1 and 1.2 is a great place to start for a bag like this. And I'm going to use this cowhide for the inside, which is a leather that's called ballet. This is actually a leather that I use almost exclusively for my shoe projects as the lining. It just is a really versatile lining, which I really like. This one is 0.8, 0.9. They do vary a little bit, but it's under 1 mil thickness, which is really nice for a lining. So let's pop the lining to the side for now and go ahead and start cutting out our main pieces of the bag. Now, one thing to keep in mind when working with a printed leather is the direction of the print. So I've got my patterns here in front of me. This top piece is going to flap down. So I kind of want the direction of this croc to sort of go down with the flap, which means that it actually wants to be this way up so that when I twist it over, that print is going down with it. I can't stress this enough that the perfection of this cut needs to be like absolutely top notch. The reason for that is because we're going to be punching little holes around the sides for our stitching. And if the pattern, if the leather is cut just a little bit smaller than the pattern, it means that our cuts will actually end up coming off the edge basically, or being too close to the edge. So you really have to cut more perfectly than you've ever cut before, basically. So I have put double-sided tape on the back there. I'm going to place this on a nice piece of the leather that I'm happy with. So let's say around about there. Sticking that down. And then I'm just going to take a knife and cut around the piece. We have got marked on our pattern here a few extra bits, which we'll come back to later. But for now, I have got the back piece cut out, and I'm actually going to remove the pattern because I'm going to use this front section here to get my front piece of the bag. So I'm gonna clear a bit of space and get my leather back out. This won't be relevant to you if you're not using a printed leather, but I had it that way for this piece, and I'm gonna have it that way for this piece because I want this to flap over the front and I want the direction of my print to continue going down. So I am gonna just put that in a place that I feel uses the leather the best, and I'm gonna go ahead and roughly cut around this as well. So I only want the front section here. Actually on the main pattern, I'll make that a whole extra piece just to uncomplicate it, but I don't need the flap. And it just shows you how great this bag is because the pieces are just the same on the front and the back, so they piece together really easily. Okay, so I can put those to the side, and then I'm gonna get my leather back out and I'm gonna cut out my base piece. Okay, so this is how our bag is looking so far. This is the front piece. This flaps over like that. This is the gusset that goes around the sides like this. So I've got all those pieces that can hang out at the side there, and I can now go ahead and cut out my lining. Now I'm going to show you a different way of cutting out the lining, just so you have options basically. So I'm just removing the double-sided tape from the back of my patterns now, because otherwise it does get quite sticky and you want to try and keep everything neat and tidy. So we'll get rid of all that, and I'll get rid of all the scraps I have here as well. All right, so for the lining, I'm gonna use this piece, and I'm actually gonna trace on the reverse side of this. Always just find like a nice area. It is the lining, but we don't wanna have like, I don't know, a big hole or a big mark or anything like that. So we need one of these. So just tracing it out as perfectly as you can to the pattern. And if you've got little weights, then yeah, absolutely use them here. Now when cutting out these lining pieces, we're gonna do something a little bit different here. So first of all, what we're gonna do is just roughly cut around them, sort of separating the three, like so. And then we're gonna keep them at that stage for now whilst we attach them to the front pieces. You might be thinking, why not just cut these out now? Just stick with me a little longer and you'll see why. There is one more thing that I would like to do on my front piece now, and that is to attach the first bit of hardware. So I'm gonna have a little twist lock opening mechanism, a bit like I've got, on that bag there. So kind of twists and opens. They're really easy to put in and they just look really great. So that's why I'm doing that. And on my pattern, I have got marked on exactly where that should go. So I'm gonna take my craft knife and I'm just gonna cut 2 little slits as indicated on the pattern. You can of course get creative and use different hardware here. So just keep in mind, if you are using your own hardware, to double, triple check that you're putting it in the correct position based on whatever it is. So it comes with this little kind of metal plate on the back, which is going to help to reduce stretch. And then you can just fold the prongs back That's in beautifully. We don't need to put in the front of the hardware just yet on the flap because that's going to go through the lining and the upper. So I'm taking my water-based glue and I'm just going to coat the whole underside of this bag right up to the edge. And on this piece, you can see a very faint line where I traced it on. I'm just going to get the glue right up to the edge of that line as well, remembering that we haven't cut this piece out perfectly just yet. Okay, and once that glue has had a few moments to dry, we can go ahead and stick it down. If you don't know this already about the glue that I'm using here, all leatherworking glue for shoes and bags is usually a contact adhesive, which means that it needs to be on both surfaces that you are sticking together, and it needs to be quite tacky or almost completely dry before you stick the two pieces together, and that's how you get a really nice strong bond. And at that point we can take our scissors and we can cut off the excess lining right up to the very edge. We don't want any overhang here at all. Beautiful, our first piece is done. I'm gonna place that to the side there. And we are gonna now line the back section and flap section of the bag. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, we are gonna start by coating both of these pieces with glue. And I know this goes without saying and is pretty obvious, but we are gluing on the underside of the leather, not on the nice side. Okay, now this one isn't quite as simple as the other one where we just stick it down, flatten it out. Because we have a curve in this piece, we want to make sure that the inside lining is really nice and smooth. And sometimes if we just stick them straight like that, what happens when we curve it is that it gets all wrinkly in the curve area. So we are going to start at the bottom where we know we want it to sit flat. And I'm going to stick that down. But where it starts to curve, I'm gonna sort of use my arm to flap over the lining like that. And I'm gonna curve the bag over the top of my arm like that. Stick with me, I know this is weird, but it's so worth it because look now on the inside, we have this beautiful smoothness, which is what we want. And it kind of helps give the bag a little bit of shape before we've even started. Okay, and at that point, we can take our scissors and cut away the excess lining perfectly to the edge, no overhang at all. So we now have the front of our bag, we have the back of our bag with the flap, and we are ready to line our final piece, which is our gusset or the base. So I'm sure you can guess what we're gonna do here, and that is, again, coat the underside of the pink right up to the edge and coat the underside of the lining just over the line that we drew on. All right, now just like our front piece had a curve in the flap, this gusset is also going to have two curves in the sides. So this, again, can be a little bit tricky to do, but just take your time with it. So we know that it needs to start curving at around this point, and basically that is where the gusset gets its widest. So if we start straight, we can see when we get to the widest point that we're gonna go in a curve around the arm, and then we're gonna drop it down and we're gonna go straight again because that's the base. And then where it starts getting narrower again, we are going to give it another bend around the arm. Okay, and that's looking really good. And you can see that that really like holds itself up now, which I'm really happy with. And I can go ahead and cut away all of the excess lining right up close. So there's absolutely no overhang. So at that stage, we can start punching our holes so that we can stitch them together. And in order to do that, I'm gonna need to go back to my patterns. Now, what I want to do is stick my patterns on here so that I can copy exactly the stitch holes that I need to punch. But you'll see that I actually have my hardware there, so I can't lay that pattern flat anymore. I have a trick for that, and it's called the trapdoor. And I'm just gonna cut a little flap in the pattern like so that I can flip this upright, and it will allow me to stick my pattern perfectly over my piece so that I can access those stitch marks while keeping it nice and flat to the leather. So I'm going to grab my double-sided tape, I'm going to grab my punching tools, and we can get started. So we're going to go back to our double-sided tape here, and I'm just going to place it along the edges. Okay, making sure that we are sticking this pattern like absolutely exactly in the right place. Because if we have any underlap of the leather, we will end up punching our holes too close to the edge. So it's really important that we go around the whole thing and just make sure that it fits perfectly, perfectly, perfectly. I am going to start punching this one. What I've got in front of me here is a punching block, and I've got some scrap leather stuck on top there. It just helps keep your pricking irons, which are the punching tools, sharper for longer. And then I've also got my mallet here, which I'm going to use to punch the holes. So on your pattern, you will have indicated how many holes you need to punch. And it's really easy. We're going to quite simply take our pricking irons, place them right over the top of the marks on the pattern, and give them a whack with the mallet. You then just want to flip it over and make sure that it has gone through all the layers. That is really important, otherwise you won't be able to stitch it in place. Now I like to take it and put it back in the last hole just to really make sure that you are keeping everything lined up and spaced out perfectly. And then you can just simply work your way around the entire thing. When you get to the corners, you'll want to move on to a 2-prong punch. I was using a 5-prong punch for that one. The 2-prong punch will help you get around the corners because that's quite tricky to do with a straight line. So take your time, and once we've punched all the way around this piece, we will move on to our other pieces as well. So once you've gone ahead and punched all of your stitching holes, we can also cut out these side holes as well. I'm just going to use my craft knife to do that because the hole itself doesn't actually have to be that perfect, because I am going to put a metal eyelet on top here, and then I can go ahead and pop these in. So we pop the first side in, and then the second side goes in at the back and simply screws in like that, and that's ready for our chain to go on. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I've got my hardware in the side, I've got my hardware in the front. I haven't got my hardware in the front of the flap yet, and I'm going to wait until I piece this together to do it last, just to really, really make sure 100,000% that it's in the right position. So with all of my pieces prepped, we are ready to start stitching. So I have in front of me some thread which I've matched to the color of my leather. This is a 0.45 mil waxed thread, so it's really nice and sturdy. And the main thing you need to keep in mind here is that you need to measure out the right length. So what I like to do is measure around the distance that I want to stitch, roughly. And then I'm going to times that by 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And because we're going through quite thick layers of leather, I'm just going to give myself a little extra for luck. Now, when we are stitching with one continuous thread, we need to put a needle on either side, so on both sides. And one of the things that can be most frustrating when stitching like this is when your needle comes unthreaded. Because we're going to be pulling these quite tight, we actually want to lock the thread onto the end of the needle so that it doesn't come undone. And rather than tying a knot, which would be quite bulky to pull through the hole, I have another method. So what I'm going to do is line up the end of the thread with the end of the needle, like so. And then at the length of the needle, I'm going to pierce it through the center of the thread. And then I'm going to pierce it through again, like that. Okay? And then with this loose end, I am going to thread the end of the needle. So you sort of create like an S shape like that. And then I'm going to pull that end and then pull that back. And that's now locked on to the end there, which is going to make stitching so much easier and so much faster as well. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other end, and then we can get started. Now, I always like to keep an awl on hand whenever I'm hand stitching, because this should be easy. So I think the main thing I want you to remember as you're stitching this is that if it feels difficult or hard to get the needle through, you need to just use your awl to sort of re-pierce those holes just to make them a little bit bigger. Okay. So I'm going to put my first needle through, and then first thing I do is just pull them both through to make sure I've got an even amount of thread on both sides, and then we can go ahead and start stitching it in place. Now, the first thing that I like to do here, just to make sure this is in really nice and secure, is that I'm actually going to go around the outside edge. So we're going back through the exact same holes as before, just to create a nice little loop around the top there. Okay, so once we've got those two loops around the top, we can go ahead and start our stitching. Now, it's really important here that the angle is right, and that is what's going to determine us getting a really nice, neat slant on every stitch. So we are going to go in through the hole from the back, pulling that all the way through, up and over, taking our other thread, going through the bottom of the slant and popping out through the bottom of this stitch as well. Okay, and then you can just get comfortable and whiz your way around the whole back of the bag. Okay, so I've stitched my way all the way around the back now. I've come to my final stitch, and what I'm going to do is put two loops around the outside of the bag again, just to make sure it's really held securely at those ends there. Now, to finish off the threads, I'm simply going to go back a stitch, and then I'm going to pop out the center of the pieces and then cut my thread off. So what I mean by that is that I'm going to go back one stitch, and instead of going all the way through the hole, I'm going to pop the needle out through the center of the pieces. And as I'm pulling that through, just before I tighten it, I am going to take a tiny bit of glue and just put it on the edge of the thread there, so that when I pull that nice and tight, it's really sealed the end of the thread into the side of the bag. You can also wipe away some excess glue once that's dried. We'll then go ahead and do the same thing on the other side before snipping off the threads. Okay, so that's gone on really, really nicely. I am ready now to attach the front section of the bag, and it's going to go in really in exactly the same way. So I'm going to start by lining up our two stitches at the very top, and then taking my little bulldog clips to hold them in place, And at that point, I can go ahead and measure out 4 times the distance that I want to stitch. I'll get my thread locked onto my needles and start by doing 2 loops at the top to secure it in place, and then whiz my way around the whole thing. And that is the stitching portion of this bag done. And at this point, we are ready to get our hardware in. So if you're following my pattern and you're using the exact same hardware as I am, then you can just use the markings that are already on the pattern. But if you are going to use your own hardware, I thought I would show you just a little tip for how to find the perfect position on the flap. And it's not a very technical tip. All I do is take a marker and I'm just coloring in the front of the hardware there. And then I sometimes will just use some stuffing as well to make sure that the bag isn't sort of flopping in the wrong direction. And then all I'm gonna do is just kind of like close the bag at the desired position and press the front against the pen mark so that I can make a little mark on my lining for the area that I know I want the hardware to go into. So I can see that I've got a very faint outline, and I'll just trace around it with my pencil. And I might just go ahead and check that against my pattern anyway, just to see how accurate it was. And it's actually pretty much spot on. You can see that my line is here and here, and of course the hardware itself is a little bit shorter in that area, so I am really happy with where that landed. And it also goes to show that this technique is pretty accurate. So at that point, I'm going to grab myself a cutting mat and a craft knife so that we can put in the other side of the hardware. Okay, so at that point I can see if it fits. Should be a snug fit, but that looks pretty good. And then we're gonna put the base plate on the back and screw our little screws in. Okay, and that is looking so good. So with our hardware in the front of the bag, we can now talk about finishing touches. Now this could absolutely be the bag almost finished. We're gonna add a little chain as the strap, but there is one final thing that I like to do. And like I said, it is totally optional because you may or may not have this. So I'm going to do a really nice edge coating with a sort of rubbery edge paint, which is just going to give it a really nice finished look, just really increase the quality and the finish of the bag. So I'm going to show you how to do that, but just keep in mind that the edge paint really is totally optional. If you don't have access to it, the bag can just be finished as is, which is also really lovely. But for the sake of learning the whole process, let me grab some edge paints and show you how it's done. Now, when it comes to edge dyeing, one of the most important things to remember is that before you start anything, you really need to prepare your edges. So I've got in front of me a little sandpaper file with a really fine grit sandpaper on it. And I'm just sort of smoothing out the edges as much as I can, really just trying to make sure that there's a nice flat surface to start with. Just be aware that you do have your stitches looping around the side, so we don't want to sand over the top of those stitches because we don't want to sand them off. So I just like to give it a little smooth like that around the whole thing. The other thing I am going to do is I'm going to put that edge paint right over the top of the loops that we made, and that's going to further seal those stitches in at the top of the bag. So I'm using the brand Giardini for my edge paints. There are lots of different edge paints available out there. I really like these ones because they kind of dry quite like rubbery and just a really nice finish. And you'll notice I'm just going to put a nice thick coat all the way around the edges. So once you've made your way around the whole bag, it's so important that you let this dry fully before we move on to the next layer. Okay, so once that base coat has had a decent dry time, and by decent I mean it should be fully dry, we can go ahead and start putting on our first layer of the edge paint. So I've got this nice sort of fuchsia color here, and I'm gonna give a nice generous coating. I kind of wanna almost like put a blob down and then drag it along. Just being really careful to make sure that it's not dripping down the sides. Okay, so that first coat has had a decent dry time. I'm just gonna take a super fine grit sandpaper and just give it a little bit of a smooth out all the way around. And then we're gonna go ahead and do our second and final coat. And once that's dry, we can go ahead and get our chain attached. Okay, we are so nearly done with this bag now. All I wanna do is attach a chain for the strap. And I've got a really great trick on how to keep it in. So let me show you. I've got in front of me these two little T-clasps. Sometimes they're called a T and O, but essentially the idea is that we're gonna open the bag. That's gonna go on the inside like that to stop the chain from coming out. So I've got two sets of pliers in front of me. This one's kind of cool. When you press in, it opens. So this is used to open chain links. And then this is just a normal pair that I'm gonna use to close the chain links back up. So I just chose a length of chain that I thought looked about right for my size, but there's no right or wrong. If you want it to be like a super short chain, to be like a shoulder bag, then that's totally cool. Or if you want a longer chain, then that's cool too. So what I'm gonna do is start here by opening up this link, and then I'm gonna place the chain through the loop of the bag, like that. And I'm gonna actually attach the little T-clasp there, and then I'm just gonna close it back up. And now this way, when I go like that, it's kind of secured on the inside of the bag. So let's do the same thing on the other side. And there we have a finished handbag. So I hope you found that tutorial helpful. Keep in mind that in my full online course, I go into so much more detail about every little thing, and of course, cover lots of different other bags and small leather goods as well. This course really is designed to take you from a complete beginner to a skilled bag maker. So it really is a great place to start. Now, whilst we do keep I Can Make Shoes and I Can Make Bags quite separate, if it is something that you're interested in doing together, we do sell both online courses as a combo course. So you can start learning about hand-stitched bags, machine-stitched bags, at the same time as learning about sandal making, boot making, sneakers, custom fittings, all this kind of stuff. You do get full lifetime access to the course, so there's absolutely no rush to work your way through it. And as always, I'm here to help and support you all the way through. And if you've got any questions at all, I genuinely would love to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out to us in the comments down below, or send us an email through at info@icanmakebags.com.